"14 beginner spy mistakes." Some of these tips come from the Spy Psychology series, but I still see a lot of new players making these mistakes. So I decided to compile a list of done goofs I often see as a fun little precursor to the Spy Psychology finale, expected to come out in 2025. Some of these mistakes are easier to avoid than others, but starting out with the most avoidable yet way too common. 1. Stacking spy. You've likely heard it before, especially since I made a whole video about it, but you never stack any more than 2 spies on a team. This isn't just because
my teamwork in Team Fortress 2.
But because of the way paranoia works, you're setting yourself up for failure since the other spies have made the enemy super spy check happy, and you lack the other classes on your team to distract them. It doesn't matter if you don't even care about your own team and just really want to play spy, you're still shooting yourself in the foot by picking spy when there's already at least 2, as your own gameplay will suffer. If the team isn't doing it as a funny meme strat, there is absolutely zero excuse for being the 3rd spy. You just don't do it no matter what. If you see at least 2 spies on your team, just play a different class. Chances are, one of them may switch off anyway, in which case you can immediately take their place without issue. This is an extremely common and critical mistake among new spy players despite how easily avoided it is. You're essentially yelling out, "I don't know what I'm doing." There is a reason most spy mains follow the golden rule of no more than 2 spies. This flows into the next mistake. 2. Not playing other classes. Spy is a hard class to pick up, so playing the other classes can often give you a break from it, but more importantly, playing the other classes gives you a better idea of how they think, which in turn feeds back into making you a better spy. Knowing how to play the other classes enables you to better avoid, trick, fight, or disguises them, even working around them when they're on your team. Playing spy at a base level requires a good amount of knowledge of the other classes' mechanics, and the best way to understand them and their mindset is by using them yourself. You don't have to be amazing at all the classes, but you should aim to at least understand the basics of each. 3. Relying on the knife animation. Getting the backstab animation and hearing that sound gives funny dopamine, and the knife does indeed raise in your hand when a backstab is in range, sure. But this knife raising animation doesn't actually affect the backstab in any way whatsoever. A lot of players will make the mistake of waiting for the animation to tell them when to stab, instead of doing it once they reach a player's back. Players move around a lot, and chances for backstabs can come and go in an instant. If you're just waiting for the animation, chances are you won't be able to react fast enough to your knife moving before it's too late. Get a feel for when you're in range to the point you're getting stabbed without even seeing the animation at all. The animation better shows you when you missed a stab more than anything. If you're really struggling, type this command into your console to make the view model smaller, or this to get rid of them entirely. 4. Lacking game sense. As much as players need to be aware of their surroundings to avoid a spy, so do you to avoid an untimely death. Game sense is being able to tell where the front lines of your team and the enemy are by using your intuition and knowledge of the objective. Good game sense is of course something you'll develop over time, especially if you avoid mistake 2, but having a good idea of where everything is and where all the action is happening makes you much better at making decisions on how to move around it. For example, if you learn common sentry spots on particular maps, you can often assume where a sentry will be at a particular point in a match. The sentry often marks a team's back line, so you can assume that most of the enemy team will be in front of it. You can also know where snipers usually sit and single them out. If your team pushes forward into the enemy, this moves the position of their front line back. You can then move forward in advance before they can set it up, so you'll already be behind the enemy lines. If the enemy pushes your team back, their front line moves up, meaning what was the front line is now either the back line or behind lines. Be aware of where the enemy lines are and how they move. 5. Using disguises before cloak. Disguises can fool good players, but they aren't foolproof. A lot of new players seem to act like disguises make them undetectable. But the disguise doesn't make you invisible, the enemy can still see you, they just see you as the wrong thing. Disguises are often detected either by dead giveaways like bumping or clones, or by context clues like teammates in unnatural positions or abnormal behavior. And just the same as people are quick to attack a cloaked spy when they discover one, the same is true for disguises. The difference between the cloak and the disguise is that the cloak makes you invisible outright, but you can't attack until fully dropping it, and it has limited use. While the disguises help you blend in while visible, but allowing you to attack instantly out of it and having unlimited use. The disguise is not for getting behind the enemy. That's the cloak's job. Disguises help you blend in once you're already there. Think of disguises as a secondary layer of stealth after the cloak. And of course remember, you are trying to blend in, so make sure you disguise as a class that makes sense and act like them. Which leads us to our next mistake. 6. Not thinking about what other players can see. As spy, getting found usually means death, so don't get found. But a big part of not getting caught is paying attention to what other players are seeing. Essentially, think about what you would look like to other players around you and consider how you could be found out. You can't just mindlessly ignore some players, you have to treat every player in the area as a potential threat. When you're disguised, think about what the enemy players are seeing when looking your way. If you were in that same position, how would you react? Would you notice something wrong? Thinking about it from their perspective can help you figure out if you're going to be found or need to adjust. If you accidentally slip up and do something that blatantly gives your cloak or disguise away, especially if you bumped into someone, you should always assume that the other player noticed and immediately start evasive maneuvers to lose them. Sometimes they may not actually notice, but don't wait until they react, since that just gives them more time to catch you. Also, pay attention to what enemy players are focused on. Where they're looking is the biggest giveaway of this. If not much is going on around them, they're more likely to notice something wrong or spy check you since they have the free moment. When they're distracted by focusing on enemies, they're far less likely to notice the more subtle things, like the fact you're not shooting your weapon. I see new players assume their disguises will always work but fail to consider how distracted the players around them are, or if someone is staring at them. Paying attention to what other players are seeing and thinking is not optional. If you can see you're about to be found, be ready to bail. Also, don't try learn spy by playing against training bots. They're extremely easy to fool and you're actually making yourself worse as spy as a result. 7. Decloaking behind people. This is another simple one, but be aware that the cloak does make an audible noise. If you decloak right behind someone, there's a good chance they may hear it, turn around, and kill you immediately. Being further away or behind walls makes the sound quieter, and when there's lots of other chaotic noises going on around you, there's a much lower chance that people will be able to hear your cloak over everything else, compared to other places where there's little noise at all. Or players who seem to have their volume turned off. I don't know. 8. Overestimating the power of the gun. Spy has a gun. The funny meme. Indeed. But a lot of people seem to think that that means the gun is the magic bullet that solves any situation. It doesn't. More so, there are many times where remembering that you can shoot people will get you out of sticky situations. However, most of your kills will still be with the knife. And there are a lot of times where the gun is a bad idea. The gun is good against targets with lower health, and with some classes, ones that are further away. But enemies with higher health that are closer to you usually won't die to the gun unless they themselves can't seem to hit you at all. In these situations, it's much better to instead either go for a trick stab or cloak away and lose them. Spy has a gun, not spy should always use the gun. 9. Always using the l'étanche. Wait, that's grammatically incorrect. I'm literally saying always using the stranger. The cloak boost from this gun is nice, it's a powerful utility and very tempting for new players, but do not. Using this too much will make you reliant on the extra cloak, otherwise known as cloak management disorder. My advice is to make sure you default to using stock, and only sometimes using the l'étanche as a boost. 10. Playing too carelessly. This extends from mistake 6, but you need to pay attention and think strategically. Rushing in too fast before you think and consider the risks of what you're doing will often get you killed. If you play spy with a WM1 mentality, you're going to have a bad time. Sometimes you will just need to wait and be patient before you can make your play. But on the other end of that spectrum, 11. Playing too passively. Because spy dies so easily, some newer players play spy incredibly passively to avoid dying constantly, only waiting for the perfect opportunity to show up with a 100% chance of success. But that opportunity will never come, because it doesn't exist. Any play you make can fail, and you need to be able to take risks sometimes. Actually, a lot of the time. The other problem with playing too passively is that you think way too hard about whether you want to go in or not, to the point that when a good chance does come up, you take so long to decide to go in that it's usually gone by the time you do. If you're sitting in the corner for minutes on end doing nothing, that's no better than always being dead. You have to be able to take risks and make quick decisions. 12. Looking at your KD ratio. Despite my recommendation in the Mastering Spy episode of Spy Psychology, I see a lot of people who've watched my videos complain about their kill-death ratio. Looking at it constantly will just make you angry and play even worse. If you're getting mad and notice you have a bad kill-death ratio, then there's a good chance that you looking at it is part of what's making you mad. Seriously, if this is a problem for you, I cannot stress enough how important it is to stop looking at it. Unbind your tab key if you need to. This really goes for any class, but especially Spy because of how often you die. 13. Expecting the same trick to always work. Sometimes you'll pull off a really good play and feel super cool about it, but then you'll try that same trick again, trying to replicate that success, and finding it isn't working. This is another massive mistake that new spies make all the time, assuming that because this trick worked once, it always will. As a spy, you need to be constantly thinking on your feet and adapting to different situations. The reason that trick you used worked that time was because it was the right trick at that moment. This is most obvious when fighting engineers, as different kinds of engineer players and nests will often get taken down with different strategies. Sometimes the strategies you attempt won't work, but this leads to my final mistake. 14. Not learning from mistakes. All the time I see new spies blame their failures on everything but themselves, claiming that they just keep dying to luck. And while it can feel like luck sometimes, you should always try your best to figure out how you died from every death. Consider what you could have done to avoid it, as it may and likely will happen again. If you convince yourself that it was just luck, then chances are you're probably going to keep throwing yourself at the same wall in the same way, not knowing why it's somehow not working. Hey, have I ever told you the definition of insanity? So let me repeat it louder for those of you in the back. If you blame every death on luck and make excuses all the time, nothing will ever improve. You have to take accountability for the vast majority of your deaths. Otherwise, you will learn nothing. It doesn't matter how much hours you have on the class or how many tutorials you watched. What matters the most is how you use those hours of gameplay to learn and improve. And that was it. I said this in my last video, but we're very close to 100k subscribers.
So but you guys are channel members, that doesn't matter. Well, thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for watching, channel, blah, blah, blah. End the video now.